the first thing I want to talk about tonight, again, we're mainly three things we want to cover tonight, and one is global business strategy concepts in Chapter 9. And I'm going to go over this fairly briefly. And then also we will talk a little bit about how to begin studying for the midterm exam, which will open up next Tuesday after class on Tuesday. And then number 3, we will also talk about how to make decisions as a team for your first competition round. We're no longer in the practice rounds. You are now in your teams in the team competition for the simulation. So lastly, we'll talk about how to make decisions as a team. There are a few things I want to review with you on that, and we'll go through that briefly. So Chapter 9 is on global business strategy, and you can read through most of this, but there are a few things I want to point out to you and explain. I'm not going to read over a lot of this, but I do want to talk about the 4 risks of international business. And you might have discussed this in one of your other classes, but the 4 risks include cross-cultural risk, which mainly have to do with cultural differences and work style, negotiating differences, country risk, which has to do with the stability of the country you are moving into or entering, currency risk, which would be the risk of currency fluctuations and taxation, and commercial risk, which has to do with the competitive environment being so different from your current competitive environment. It may include if you're entering a foreign country through a partnership, may include the strength of your partner as well. So you can read through a lot of these cross-cultural risks, but one of the things I wanted to point out was Hofstede's cross-country cultural dimensions. Have any of you discussed this in one of your other classes, possibly in the organizational behavior class or the I don't know.
Remember, we had an assignment in the marketing class for this last week, but the website was down, so we didn't have to do it.
Oh, really? Okay. So the website is currently not working. Okay. So I was going to point that out. They do have a website, which is pretty cool because you can compare your home country with any other country in the world. And I have one chart I'll show you with that. But there are 6 different dimensions, and what Hofstede has done, and this has been several decades in the work, he's collected a lot of research on work style differences. The cross-country cultural dimensions have to do with employees' work style, their attitudes and values, and what motivates people, at work and in business. And he identified 6 different dimensions. One is how individualistic or collectivistic the culture is, the work culture is. Another is how masculine or feminine. Masculine is more competitive, is more direct, it's more authoritarian. Feminine, it has more to do, and it doesn't really have to do with gender roles so much, but it has to do more with the culture in the workplace. So feminine would be more indirect, more inclusive, taking care of employees, environments that have more work-life balance, more focus on the employee, tend to be what we would call more feminine cultures. Uncertainty avoidance would be how comfortable people are in taking risks, or not taking risks. I said it just the opposite. And avoiding uncertainty means that you're less likely to take a risk. And that would be counter to entrepreneurial spirit, wouldn't it? Power distance is the degree to which people are comfortable with inequality. So there are a lot of countries like in Asia that are accepting of power differences Generally in the United States, we see less of an acceptance of power distance. That's why you see in the workplace flatter organizations. There's several reasons for that. Our hierarchy now is a lot flatter. We don't go through as many tiers. We're looking at our bosses as more team leaders and not as bosses or supervisors. So even what we call our bosses in the workplace has changed over the decades. Our time perspective, whether we tend to be more long-term in our orientation or short-term in our orientation. And then one that's, I think, very much related to time perspective is our what we call indulgence or restraint, which is whether we want instant gratification or are we willing to work towards a long-term goal and put off gratification so that we can get the job done. And, you could probably guess how the United States will score on each one of these 6 dimensions. But what's really interesting is when you compare us to another culture, and it becomes relevant if you're doing business in that culture because it changes the way that you, one, manage employees, and two, market to customers in that country in terms of your advertising content, what you say, and promoting your product. So, and you can see this is not so surprising. What United States usually excels in comparison to other cultures, especially Asian cultures, is individualism. And that's versus, whether we are more focused on, doing well ourselves, pulling ourselves up by our own bootstraps. You've heard that term before, taking care of oneself versus taking care of the group as a whole. And so we tend to score highest in the world on individualism. So our employees tend to prefer individual rewards over group rewards. We have to work really hard to get people to think about the organization, what's good for the organization as a whole, what's good for the team as a whole. And generally that means designing reward systems that are not just individual in nature, not just individual rewards, but also group rewards as well. You can see that we're very similar to China in terms of our masculinity. We tend to be still a very masculine work environment, especially as you move up in the organization. We are not nearly as accepting now, and this difference is going to be continue to be wider and wider, I believe, over the next decade, because the amount of power distance, in other words, the inequality, although there is, as we know, inequality in the workplace, in our society, we're less willing to accept it. So as we see the inequality, I think this number is going to this gap will only widen. And we tend to have a short term, the purple is the United States, we tend to have more of a short term, as we all know, short term orientation. So we want to buy it now. We don't want to wait. We're very impulsive. That has to do with our indulgence being much higher. Very impulsive. Let's put it on the credit card. Let's buy it now, not save for some future time. So we tend to be more short term. Businesses in general tend to be more short term. We're looking at our short term profits. And that's why in this class, we focus a lot on having a long term orientation so that you can invest now for 3 to 5 years down the road. So that balanced scorecard measure is one of the ways we can try to overcome that. So the focus is not so much on short-term financial success, but also on internal efficiencies, on customer satisfaction, and on our employees as well. So if we're looking at all of those things that can make us more competitive in the future and not just bottom line profits in the short term, we're more likely to be successful in the long term. So this is something, as you can tell, we need to work on. So I wanted to point that out on there because I'm not sure if there are other, now that you told me marketing is, that's good, but I'm not sure if there are other classes that really mention Hofstede in them. And so we go over the different types of risk, and I give you some examples there. One of the things that's been in the news lately that I'm sure that you have come across is that idea that as our currency weakens, it actually makes us more competitive globally. So it makes our products less expensive, or it gives us a larger profit margin when we move into other countries. So when our currency is weaker, meaning the dollar is declining in value, let's take, for example, to the euro. In Europe, there are several countries in Europe, as you know, that are on the euro, that have the standardized euro. And as the euro gains in strength versus the American dollar, we can then take that difference and lower our prices in Europe. And when you convert the euro back to dollars, it converts to more dollars for us. So we have the option of either keeping our prices the same in Europe and enjoying a higher profit margin, or we could use that change in currency to lower our prices in Europe and then be able to compete better, because we know there's a direct or indirect relationship between price and quantity demanded. So as we lower our price, quantity demanded should go up. All things being equal, quantity demanded should go up. So our dollar for a long time was getting stronger and stronger relative to most currencies in the world, and that made it more difficult for us to compete in other countries. So now what's happening is we're going in the opposite direction. And that's helping us. But on the other hand, as you know, there are also new tariffs that are causing problems with our competitiveness. So it's sort of a double-edged sword. We've got some good things going on that should help us compete globally, but then we also have tariff wars going on that will put us at a disadvantage. And so I go through an example of how a weaker dollar might help us. So if you take a dollar, if €1 equals $1.40 right now, I'm not sure. I didn't look today to see what it was. It's not $1.40, but it is going up. You can actually Google and see the trend on that. Then $100 pair of shoes in Europe would cost €71 if you flip that out and did the math on it. If the dollar decreased in value, meaning that €1 is now worth $1.50, then $100 pair of shoes in Europe would only cost €67. So we have that option. We can continue to charge €71 and enjoy a higher profit margin, or we can reduce our price and be more price competitive in Europe as well, all the other things being equal. There are other things we can do if we're competing in other countries where you're finding, especially in those developing countries where the currency is in fact weaker, and we're not competitive because of our stronger currency, the dollar, the American dollar. We can choose to build plants in those countries. I know we're trying to build plants here in the United States, but our currency is still very strong to a lot of other countries' currencies, developing countries' currencies. We can also increase or decrease our wholesale price, reduce the amount of exports and imports on an annual basis. There are things we can do immediately. Building plants is a long-term solution. We can also reduce or increase our marketing costs, to match the currency fluctuations going on. But in general, currency fluctuations are a big international risk, and we tend to choose countries where the currency is not fluctuating as much. It also is a good idea if we can choose countries where their currency is a little stronger, if we want to build the product here and ship overseas, or if we want to decide to build a manufacturing plant in a weaker country whose currency is weaker, that also makes sense because we can take advantage of a weaker currency and pay employees in the local currency there, which is what has been happening over the past several decades, as you know. So we go over different other types of international business risks. And again, watch the 15-minute video that I have under this week's learning module. We go over the reasons why people tend to decide to participate in international business or decide to expand globally. There's a lot of risk, as you might guess, that's involved, but maybe growth opportunities have become limited in the United States. I mean, I would think most companies would try to expand nationally here in the United States before looking at other countries in which to expand. Maybe the profit margins and the competition is a lot less in those foreign countries. You could look at Aflac as an example. Aflac went into Japan mainly because when the founder went to Japan in the 1970s, he realized that although they had a national healthcare system, it didn't necessarily pay for all the medical expenses that one might go through. If you think about the cost of the work that you might lose, or housing requirements, or having people come into your home to help you recuperate, going through that whole recuperation process. Medical insurance wouldn't necessarily cover all of it, even if you have a nationalized healthcare system. And so having seen that and seeing that there weren't any other companies like Aflac competing in Japan, he saw it as a really good opportunity. And turned out that he had actually a monopoly on supplemental insurance. It wasn't a primary insurance. It's supplemental insurance is their main product, their flagship product. And now you probably know that 70% of Aflac's business comes from Japan, not the United States, even though their home office is in Columbus, Georgia. But that's one of the reasons why they decided to participate in international business. So there are a lot of different reasons to do that. You can read through that as well. One of the other last things I want to review, if I can get my computer to work here. All right, it's just stuck. Let's see. Is another question we're going to get in the case that you are working on. Okay, now it's all right. Now it's assigning is whether your company should, let me go back. Now it's whether your company should decide on what we call a multi-country strategy or a global strategy. These are two different strategies. A multi-country strategy is basically when a company decides that it's going to tailor its specific strategy to each country. So you wouldn't have one strategy across the world. And I use Coca-Cola as an example. I think Coca-Cola is really sort of a hybrid strategy, where what Coca-Cola does is it has its flagship brand, which, Coca-Cola is sold all over the world. But if you've ever been to the Coca-Cola Museum in Atlanta, you know this, but you probably know this anyway, but they tailor their product mix to the tastes of each region in the world. And so when you go to England, you'll see different Coca-Cola products are being sold in England than here in the United States, because their taste and what they grew up on and what they prefer is different than customers here in the United States. So they do customize their marketing strategy and their product strategy by country, by region of the world. If you go to the Southern Hemisphere, you'll see a lot of their products are sweeter, because a lot of the things that they prefer have more sugar in them or sweeter. Tends to be more, if you've tasted some of the products that they sell in Europe, they're more tart, they're less sweet than they are here in the United States. So it's all customized, but at the same time, they do have a similar marketing strategy for their flagship brand, Coca-Cola. So I would call it more of a hybrid, not a traditional multi-country. I think a traditional multi-country might be Aflac, in that, Aflac and the way that they market their products in Japan and the types of products that they sell in Japan. And their advertising strategy, of course, is much different. And they are only in 2 countries, you probably know, and that's in the United States and Japan. So for right now, they're only in those 2 countries. And that versus what you would call a global competitor. A global competitor is someone who has one strategy that's used across the world. And I think the best example I could think of was Apple. Apple products, pretty much the same no matter where they're sold. You might see some differences, of course, in their advertising content. But the product itself and the way that they compete and the way that they market their products is pretty much the same across the world. Okay, so we go through that, and you see hybrid strategy. Think global, act local is, I think, probably best describes a Coca-Cola strategy. And you go through some of the advantages and disadvantages of each one of these 3 strategies. And then we're going to go over the different options for establishing a competitive presence in foreign markets. And we use some examples here, American companies that are actually doing this, maintaining a national 1-country production base and exporting goods to foreign markets. And I think Boeing would be a good example of that, or licensing other firms to use your technology or distribute your products. That would be Microsoft, employing a franchising. We can name multitude of American companies doing that with McDonald's. If you go travel abroad, you see these franchises all over the world. Acquisitions and ventures, we know Apple and Google does a lot of that, or strategic alliances or joint ventures. You see Delta Airlines has strategic alliances with different other airlines all over the world as well. So part of how they increase their distribution or their routes around the world is by developing strategic partners with Air France, for example, is one of them. And they have a bunch of them now. So those are the different ways that you can develop your international presence. And we go through each one of these in more detail. And I go through some of the benefits of strategic alliances and some of the risks of strategic alliances. And one of them would be, of course, communication issues and cross-cultural issues and just logistical issues that could occur, or just having conflicting objectives and losing part of your strategic advantage to another global company, releasing some of your own competitive advantages by partnering with a global company like this could put you long-term at a potential disadvantage, especially if that partnership breaks up, because they have now learned the knowledge and the expertise from how you developed the strategic advantage. So again, just go through these and this again is in chapter 9. I have another another 15-minute video that will go over some other concepts and give you some examples that are different than what I used. This is a little 15-minute video, so watch that before you take the quiz this week, and we'll discuss it again next week if you have any questions about it. I have also one item under the week 7 learning module is developing an efficient team decision-making process. And there are a couple of different ways that you could do this. And as I said before, and those of you who signed on a little late, you might have missed this, but I think for the first couple of rounds, I would really focus on having everybody together to make decisions. Whether you do that with an online meeting or face-to-face meeting, it really doesn't matter. But I'm going to show you when we go into the CAPSIM, I'm going to show you one of the things that you might do. And here's how I would handle it. I would tell each one, most teams have 3 people. I think there's one team with 4 people, but I would have each one on the team ask each teammate to go in as homework before you meet, to go in and develop his or her own decisions on each one of those 4 or 5. Once we get the advanced marketing menu, that'll be 6 different decision menus. On each one of the decision menus, have each person do their homework. In other words, make their own decisions, and then save these as a draft. All right, not official. And I'll show you how to do that in just a minute. But you're going to save them as a draft. And then when you meet, you can compare each other's forecasts. First of all, you want to make sure that you all have the same forecast, that you have one forecast for each one of your products. And then also your pro formas. You can see who has the better pro forma balance scorecard. All right. And then you can discuss which decisions each person came up with. All right. That way, everyone is contributing. You can debate, in other words, on the R&D menu, which products should we R&D and what should we do with them? Should we be in all 5 segments? Or should we start allowing them to float into other segments? Should we begin to choose? You probably realized in the practice rounds that by round 3, the computer-generated companies started getting pretty aggressive, especially in those niche segments, the high-end, the size and the performance segments. They started really upping the ante in terms of the product dimensions in their performance and size. So it was getting more and more difficult to compete in those niche segments unless you were aggressive in the R&D from the beginning, and that might mean introducing new products, so you had cutting edge technologies. So have each person develop his or her own draft decisions before you meet, so that each person has done his or her homework and they come to the meeting with something to discuss and debate with the team. So you have some rich discussions about what should be done. You can also compare the forecasts that each one of you come up with, and you can compare the pro formas to see who has the better one and which route should we take, which direction should we take. You can have some good discussions about that. And only when the team agrees on which direction, which decisions are best, do you have someone enter those decisions and upload them as official decisions for the entire team. I'm going to show you how to do that once we go in there. But there are a couple of other recommendations that I have for you about that. Before we go into CAPSIM, though, I do want to show you that I have spent a lot of time developing the test study sheet. You go under the week 8 module, you can pull up the midterm exam study sheet. This is where you want to spend your time, all right? This is 25% of your grade. I don't want you to get too freaked out about it because we still have 75% out there, but I do want you to be prepared for it. And here are the questions I might ask. You can probably tell which one of these are short answer and which one of them will be more in an essay format, right? So I have all the questions I might answer. You notice there are a few chapters, like in chapter 2, there are only 2 questions. Well, that's what I think is most important out of chapter 2. That's what I want you to focus on in chapter 2. All right. So that's going to focus your studying. You might have read the entire chapter, but these are the 2 main things I want you to get out of chapter 2. Chapter 3, I have several questions. We went over corporate social responsibility. The financial analysis part, I really don't want you to memorize these ratios, although they're pretty easy to guess. If you didn't know how to come, gross profit margin, we should know what that is. That's sales minus the cost of goods sold, right? Net profit margin also takes into account your operating expenses. Earnings per share is just like it sounds. It's your net income divided by the number of shares outstanding. I'm not going to have the PE. I'll go ahead and tell you the PE ratio. We didn't really talk about that. It's not going to be on the test. But PE ratios can impact stock price, but they're a little squirrely. There are different strategies in investing with PE ratios. There are a lot of stocks out there that are people consider to be way overvalued, but the price keeps going up. So we didn't really talk about it, and that's something I'd leave to the finance class if they talk about that. But some of these debt ratios are also important. The current ratio is easy to remember, current assets over current debt. The quick ratio just takes out your inventory because it's eliminating the things that might take some time. It's looking at true liquidity, the things you have right now. Inventory can take some time to move. Debt to assets is exactly that. It's your total debt over your total assets. It comes from the balance sheet. Debt to equity is exactly that. It's your total debt divided by your stockholders' equity. It comes from the balance sheet. All right. We also didn't talk about interest coverage ratio. You won't be asked about that. But inventory turnover and days in inventory is also important. All right. So look over these. Now, what I'm going to ask you, though, is number one, how would you improve this if you see that your gross profit margin is lower than your competitors and lower than last year? Both of those are bad signs. All right. Then it means that either your sales revenue is going down or your costs are going up faster than your sales revenue, or both. So your costs could be going up, your sales revenue going down. Both could be happening. So what we need to find out is, where's the problem? If it's in your sales revenue, then maybe new marketing techniques would help. If it's in your cost structure, then maybe investing in more cost efficiencies in your production efficiency if you're a manufacturing firm, or maybe training your employees and better negotiations with your suppliers if you're a retailer. So we need to figure out why our gross profit margin is going down and then decide how we can improve the gross profit margin. So those are the things I would ask. How could you improve it? Number two is higher better or lower better. Now, we know profits, the higher the better. But once we get to the debt and activity ratios, not everyone knows that. So here's a good rule of thumb. I think we talked about this in class. If debt is in the numerator, lower is generally better. But always, if I ask you that question, is a debt to assets ratio of 1 good? Then your answer would be, and this is not a trick question, your answer would be, it depends. Generally, you would like your assets to be twice your debt. That's generally speaking, but you want to compare with past history and you want to compare with your competitors to see if that's considered good, because your strategy depends on what your other direct competitors are doing, and also your past history, whether or not it's getting better. In other words, your assets are getting larger than your debt, or getting worse. So you're looking at trends, your own history, and you're looking at a comparison or benchmarking with your direct competitors, those who have a similar strategy and a similar target market that they're going after. So direct competitors are different than indirect competitors. Direct competitors are those who are directly competing with us. In the simulation, it would be those who are in the same segment bubble. If you look at the R&D perceptual map, those who are in the same segment bubble. So if you are mainly a broad low-cost competitor, then you're looking at the low-end product and the traditional product segments. Probably. And you're trying to compete better in those two segments. So your direct competitors would be the other competitors who are also competing in those two segments, right? Because they have a similar target market and most likely a similar strategy for those products. All right. So those are the main questions you're going to get. I'm not going to ask you what is the formula. So, but it's easy to tell. If I did, it would be easy to say because the name gives it away. In chapter 6, you can see the questions there that we've asked. Chapter 7 and 8, the directional strategies, and that has to do more with corporate strategy. And then chapter 9 is what we're covering this week. You can see Hofstede's cross-country culture dimensions is also in there.
I got a question about that.
Yes.
So since we can't access the website, is that going to be, we can't really play around with it and get to know it?
I know it would be so much fun if
familiarize
you
ourselves with
could.
it.
You don't.
No, I know, but
Yeah.
is that going to be on? Are you going to take that out of the test then, or
no? So, but I might
why
ask
wouldn't
this
you?
question: which dimension does the U.S. stand out? We all know that one now, right?
Individualism.
Yeah, yeah. If you compare us with any country, I think in the world, we're gonna score higher on that. That's just part of our culture. So, and then we had, I believe, 2 journal articles. What is strategy article and the balanced scorecard article? Am I correct? We did not have a third one, did we? Those were the 2. You should be able to see the answers that I have for those 2 articles. All right. So the questions that I asked for those journal articles, they may also be on the test as possibly a essay question.